"Don't sign that contract, sir." The boy said it from the doorway of the 41st floor conference room of Harrow Capital Partners, one hand on the doorframe, the other pressed against his chest where the inside pocket of his school jacket was. He was 11 years old. Dark brown skin, close-cropped hair, wearing his school uniform, navy jacket, white shirt, gray trousers, with the particular neatness of a child whose mother had been precise about these things and whose habits had outlasted her. His shoes were polished. His tie was straight. He had taken 2 buses and a subway across the city, and then walked 6 blocks and told the woman at the reception desk on the ground floor that he had something for Mr. Callum Hurst that could not wait. And she had looked at him for a long moment, and something in the way he said it had made her pick up the phone. His name was Daniel Osei. The room he was standing in the doorway of contained 7 people. 6 of them were lawyers, or people who worked with lawyers, men and women in dark suits, arranged around a long table covered in documents. The 7th was Callum Hurst, 53 years old, the founder and chief executive of Hurst Development Group, a man who had built one of the most successful commercial real estate companies in the country from a single rented office and 20 years of decisions that other people said could not be made. Callum Hurst was holding a pen. He had been about to sign. The pen was uncapped. His hand was 6 inches from the signature line on a contract that represented the single largest transaction of his professional life. The acquisition of the Meridian Tower development rights, a deal that had taken 14 months to negotiate, that involved 3 law firms and 2 governments, and a sum that the financial press had been speculating about for 6 weeks. It was the contract that was going to define the next decade of his company's existence. He looked up from the page. He looked at the boy in the doorway. "Who let you in?" he said. "The lady downstairs," Daniel said. "I told her it was important." "This is a closed meeting." "I know, sir. I'm sorry. But I need to give you something before you sign that." He pressed his hand against the inside pocket of his jacket again. "It's from my mother. She said you would know her name. Her name was Grace Osei." The room was very quiet. Callum Hurst's hand, still holding the uncapped pen, did not move. Daniel Osei had been 11 years old for 3 weeks when he saw the headline. He had been eating breakfast at the small kitchen table in his Aunt Patricia's apartment. A bowl of cereal, a glass of orange juice, the newspaper his aunt kept on the table, because she said a house without a newspaper was a house that didn't know what day it was. He had been reading the sports pages, which he read every morning the way his mother had read the financial pages, because she had told him it didn't matter which section you started with, as long as you read something and read it completely. He had turned the page and seen the headline on the financial section. Hurst Development Group set to finalize Meridian Tower acquisition. Signing expected this week. He had read the article twice. It was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned 14 months of negotiation. It mentioned 3 law firms. It mentioned a transaction that the financial press had been speculating about for 6 weeks. It did not mention a provision in the 3rd schedule, subsection 4, C. It did not mention a 1991 contamination report. It did not mention a 4-page letter in a plain white envelope in a blue box under a bed. Daniel had set down his spoon. He had finished his orange juice. He had folded the newspaper exactly as he had found it and placed it back on the table. Then he had gone to his room and pulled the blue box out from under his bed and opened it. The envelope was there. For Callum Hurst only, in his mother's handwriting. Slightly worn at the edges from 11 months of being in the box and the 3 occasions when Daniel had opened the box to make sure it was still there. He had picked it up. He had turned it over once in his hands. He had put it back and closed the box and gone to school. He had needed one day to think. His mother had taught him that. She had told him that decisions that mattered deserved a day, not a week, not a month. That was procrastination, she said, which was fear wearing patience's clothes. But one day to sit with a thing and know it from all its angles before you moved. He had sat with it for one day. The next morning he had taken the envelope from the blue box and put it in the inside pocket of his school jacket, the pocket closest to his chest, because that was where you kept things that needed protecting. He had told his Aunt Patricia he was going to school. He had taken 2 buses and a subway across the city to the financial district. He had walked 6 blocks to the Harrow Capital Partners building. He had looked up the address the night before on his aunt's laptop, along with the name of the company that managed the building's floors and the floor that Hurst Development Group occupied. He had walked in through the revolving glass doors with his school jacket and his straight tie and his polished shoes, and he had gone to the reception desk on the ground floor and told the woman behind it that he had something for Mr. Callum Hurst that could not wait. She had looked at him for a long moment. He had looked back. There was something about the way he stood, not aggressive, not pleading, simply present, that had made her pick up the phone. He did not know exactly what it was. His mother had had it too, that quality of standing in a space as if you had every right to be there, not because anyone had given you permission, but because permission was a thing you carried inside yourself, or you didn't. He had absorbed it from her the way children absorb the things that mattered, slowly, over years, without being told. The woman at the reception desk had made a call. She had spoken quietly, listened, spoken again. She had put the phone down and looked at him and said, 41st floor, someone will meet you at the elevator. He had thanked her. He had gone up. Grace Osei had worked for Hurst Development Group for 11 years. She had started as a junior contracts analyst when Daniel was an infant, had risen to senior contracts manager by the time he was 6, and had been, by the time of her death 14 months ago, the head of the legal compliance division, the person whose job it was to read everything, catch everything, and ensure that nothing Hurst Development Group signed contained a provision that would later become a problem. She had been good at her job. Callum Hurst had said so at her funeral, standing at the lectern of a church in the east of the city, with his hands flat on either side of the podium, choosing his words with the care he brought to all things. He had said that Grace Osei had the best eye for detail of anyone he had ever worked with. He had said that the company was better because of her. He had said that he was personally diminished by her absence. He had meant all of it. He had also, in the 14 months since her death, continued to build the Meridian Tower deal, the deal that Grace had been working on in the last months of her life, the deal she had raised questions about in a series of internal memos that had been reviewed by the incoming compliance head and deemed satisfactory, the deal that was now represented by the stack of documents on the conference room table, the deal he had been about to sign. Daniel did not know most of this yet. He knew some of it, the parts his mother had told him in the last weeks when she was still well enough to talk for long stretches, when she sat in the chair by the window and he sat on the floor beside it, and she said things she needed to say before she ran out of time to say them. She had told him about the contract. She had told him about what she had found in it. She had told him that she had written it all down in a letter addressed to Callum Hurst, that the letter was in the envelope in the blue box under her bed, and that if the Meridian Tower deal ever came back, and she believed it would, she said, because 14 months was not enough time to kill a deal this size, Daniel was to take the letter to Callum Hurst himself, not to the office, to Callum Hurst himself. She had made him promise. He had promised. He had been 10 years old when he made the promise, sitting on the floor beside his mother's chair with his back against the window and the late afternoon light coming in over his shoulder, and he had not entirely understood what he was promising. But he had learned, in the years since, that the things you promised the people you loved in the time they had left were the promises that did not expire. He had kept the letter. He had kept it in the envelope in the blue box under his bed, where his mother had put it. He had moved it to the blue box under his new bed when he moved to his aunt's apartment after the funeral. He had checked it was still there every few weeks, the way you checked on a thing you were responsible for. And 3 days ago, he had seen the headline in the financial pages of the newspaper his aunt kept on the kitchen table. Hurst Development Group, set to finalize Meridian Tower. Acquisition, signing expected this week. He had gone to the blue box under his bed. He had taken out the envelope. And this morning, he had put on his school uniform because his mother had been precise about these things, and he had taken 2 buses and a subway across the city. Grace Osei, Callum Hurst said. He said it quietly. He set the pen down on the table beside the signature line. He did not set it down the way a man set something down when he was done with it. He set it down the way a man set something down when he needed his hands free to think. The lawyers around the table exchanged looks of the specific variety that lawyers exchanged when something had happened that was not on the agenda. "Whose child are you?" Callum said. "Hers," Daniel said. "She was my mother." Callum looked at the boy in the doorway for a long moment. He looked at the Navy school jacket, the straight tie, the polished shoes. He looked at the hand pressed against the inside pocket of the jacket. He looked at the face, which was the face of an 11-year-old boy who had taken 2 buses and a subway across the city and talked his way past a reception desk and was now standing in the doorway of a 41st floor conference room doing the thing he had promised a dead woman he would do. "Come in," Callum said. One of the lawyers, a man named Forsyth, who had been managing the Meridian Tower transaction for 9 months, said, "Callum, we have a schedule. The counterparties are—" "Give us a moment," Callum said. He did not look at Forsyth when he said it. Daniel came into the room. He walked to the end of the table, to the empty chair at Callum's left. He did not sit down. He stood beside the chair and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out the envelope. It was a plain white envelope, slightly worn at the edges from 11 months of being in a blue box and 3 days of being in a school jacket pocket. On the front, in Grace Osei's handwriting, the small, precise handwriting that Daniel had learned to read before he learned to read anything else, were 4 words, "For Callum Hurst only." Daniel placed it on the table in front of Callum. Callum looked at it. He looked at the handwriting. He had seen that handwriting on 1,000 documents over 11 years. He had seen it on compliance reports and contract annotations and the yellow sticky notes his compliance head used to leave on his desk when something required his personal attention. The notes he had kept in the drawer on the right side of his desk because he kept things that mattered. He picked up the envelope. "How long have you had this?" he said. "Since before she died," Daniel said. "She gave it to me. She told me to bring it to you if the Meridian Tower deal came back." Callum looked at the boy. She knew the deal would come back. "She said 14 months wasn't enough time to kill it," Daniel said. "She was right." Callum opened the envelope. The letter was 4 pages long, handwritten on the same plain white paper as the envelope, in the same small, precise hand. It was dated 11 months before Grace Osei's death, which meant she had written it during the period when she was still working, still in the office every day, still the person whose job it was to read everything and catch everything. Callum read it at the conference table with 7 other people in the room, which was not how he would have chosen to read it, but was the situation he was in. He read it the way he read all important documents, completely in order, without skipping. The first page was a summary. Grace had written it the way she wrote all her summaries, the conclusion first, the supporting detail after. The conclusion was this: the Meridian Tower acquisition contract contained a provision in its 3rd schedule, subsection 4 and C, that transferred environmental liability for the site's pre-existing contamination from the seller to the buyer in language that was technically accurate but structured in a way that made the transfer invisible to a reader who was not specifically looking for it. The provision had been inserted into the third schedule of the contract's 40th revision, which was the revision that had been circulated for final review. Grace had found it. She had flagged it in an internal memo. The memo had been reviewed, and the provision had been deemed, by the incoming compliance head, who had been in the role for 3 weeks, as standard environmental warranty language. It was not standard environmental warranty language. The second page explained what it was. Grace had researched the site's history. The Meridian Tower development site had been, until 1987, the location of a chemical processing plant. The plant had operated for 31 years and had been decommissioned and partially remediated, but the remediation had been incomplete. There was a contamination report from 1991 that had never been fully actioned. The contamination was real, documented, and under the provision in subsection 4(c) would become Hurst Development Group's legal and financial responsibility the moment the acquisition contract was signed. The third page contained the numbers. Grace had estimated the remediation cost at between $40 and $90 million, depending on the scope of the required work. She had estimated the legal exposure if the contamination was discovered post-signing, and after construction had begun at considerably more. The phrase she used was potentially company-ending, and she had underlined it once, which was the only underlining in the entire 4 pages, and which told Callum everything about how seriously she had meant it. The 4th page was shorter. It said that she had raised this in a memo, and that the memo had been reviewed and dismissed. It said that she did not believe the dismissal was correct, and that she was writing this letter because she might not be in a position, at the time the deal came back, to raise it again herself. It said, "I know you will make the right decision when you have the right information. You always have. I wanted to make sure you had it." It was signed, at the bottom of the 4th page, in the same small, precise hand, Grace. Callum set the letter down on the table. He sat for a moment without speaking. The room was very quiet. Forsyth had read enough of the letter over Callum's shoulder to have gone quite pale. 2 of the other lawyers were looking at each other with the specific expression of people who have just understood that the meeting they are in has changed character entirely. Daniel stood at the end of the table, his hand on the back of the empty chair, watching Callum's face. "Mr. Hurst," Forsyth said carefully, "we should discuss—" "Not now," Callum said. "The counterparties are waiting." "I said not now." He looked at Forsyth. It was not a long look, but it was sufficient. Forsyth stopped speaking. Callum looked at Daniel. "Sit down," he said. Daniel sat. "Did your mother tell you what was in the letter?" "Not all of it. She said there was something wrong in the contract. She said she had found it and written it down, and that it was important." He paused. "She said you were a good man, and that good men made good decisions when they had the right information." Callum was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How old are you?" 11. "You took 2 buses and a subway to get here, and walked 6 blocks. Because your mother asked you to." "Because I promised her," Daniel said. There was a distinction in the way he said it, not because she asked, but because I promised. Callum heard the distinction. "How long ago did you promise?" "About a year before she died." He paused. "I was 10. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood that it was important and that she needed me to do it." Callum picked up the letter again. He looked at the 4th page, at the single underlined phrase, at the signature at the bottom. "She wrote this when she was still working," he said. "Yes, sir. She could have sent it to me directly. She chose to give it to you instead." Daniel looked at the table. She said she didn't know how much time she had. She wanted to make sure it reached you even if... He stopped. He pressed his lips together for a moment. Then he said, "She wanted to make sure." Callum set the letter down. He looked at the stack of documents on the table in front of him. 14 months of negotiation, 3 law firms, the pen uncapped and waiting. He looked at the unsigned signature line. He looked at the boy. "Forsyth," he said. "Yes." "Call the counterparties. Tell them we need to postpone the signing. Tell them we've identified a due diligence item that requires review. Use that language exactly." Forsyth stared at him. "Callum, the deadline. The deadline can be extended. Environmental liability cannot be transferred back once it's been accepted." He stood. "Everyone else, please give us the room." The lawyers gathered their documents with the subdued efficiency of professionals who had been dismissed from a room and were too experienced to show what they felt about it. They filed out. Forsyth was last. He paused at the door and looked at Callum with the expression of a man who wanted to say several things and had decided not to say any of them. He closed the door. The conference room was empty except for Callum Hurst and an 11-year-old boy, and a 4-page letter on a table beside an unsigned contract. Callum stood at the window. The 41st floor looked out over the city, the particular view that only existed at that height, the way the streets became patterns, and the buildings became a landscape, and the whole thing looked, from up here, more orderly than it was. He had stood at this window many times in the 20 years since he had moved the company to this building. He had stood at it on good days, and on very bad days, and on several days that had gone one way when he had expected them to go the other. He had never stood at it quite like this. "Daniel," he said, without turning from the window. "Yes, sir." "Your mother raised you alone?" "Yes, sir. Since I was born." "Who do you live with now?" "My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister. She's good." A pause. "She doesn't have much space, but she makes it work." Callum turned from the window. He looked at the boy sitting at the conference table, the polished shoes, the straight tie, the hand that had been pressed against the inside pocket of his jacket for the entire morning, now resting quietly on the table. "Why didn't you open the letter?" Callum said. Daniel looked at him. "It wasn't mine to open. She addressed it to you." "You've had it for over a year. You could have opened it at any point, and no one would have known." "I would have known," Daniel said. Callum looked at him for a long moment. "Your mother told me once," he said, "that she had a son who was going to be someone. She didn't say it in a proud way. She said it the way a person says something they are certain of, as a fact." He looked at the letter on the table. "I told her I didn't doubt it." Daniel looked at the table. His expression did the thing it did when something landed in a place he didn't have words for. Very still, eyes down, the particular stillness of someone letting something in rather than responding to it. "May I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Yes." The provision she found, the one in subsection 4, C. If you had signed today. "It would have become our liability," Callum said. "When the contamination was discovered during construction, and it would have been discovered, we would have been legally responsible for a remediation that the seller knew about and structured the contract to transfer to us." He paused. "It would have taken years to litigate. The costs would have been..." He stopped. "It would have been very serious." "Potentially company ending," Daniel said. Callum looked at him. "She underlined it," Daniel said. "I didn't read the letter, but I saw the letter before I sealed it back up. She only underlined one thing." Callum was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, potentially company ending." Daniel nodded slowly. He was processing something. Callum could see it in the way he was sitting, the particular internal quality of a child working through the full shape of something. She knew, Daniel said. She knew what it would mean, and she still… He stopped. She spent some of the last time she had writing 4 pages so that you would have the right information. Yes, Callum said, because she thought you were a good man. The phrase landed in the room with the weight of the person who had originally said it. Callum felt it the way you felt things that arrived from the dead through the people they had left behind, suddenly and completely, and without warning. She was right about most things, Daniel said. He said it simply, without sentimentality, a statement of fact about someone he had known well. She was usually right. Callum sat back down at the table, not in his original chair at the head, but in the chair beside Daniel, 2 down from the unsigned contract. He sat down the way a man sat when he was done with the formality of a position and wanted to be in a room with another person. Tell me about her, he said. What do you want me to know about her? Daniel looked at him. It was not the question he had expected. He had expected logistics. What happens next with the contract? What will you do? Thank you for coming. He had not expected, tell me about her. He thought about it seriously, the way he thought about serious things. She read everything, he said finally. Not just for work. She read everything. The backs of cereal boxes, the small print on receipts. She said you couldn't trust a document you hadn't read completely, and that applied to everything. He paused. She used to read me the terms and conditions of things when I was little, instead of stories. I thought it was normal until I went to school and realized it wasn't. Callum almost smiled. She made good soup, Daniel said. Even at the end when she couldn't stand for long. She made it sitting down, with a stool she put next to the stove. She said bad soup was inexcusable. He looked at his hands. She said most bad things were inexcusable if you just paid attention. She was right about that too, Callum said. She was meticulous, Daniel said. About everything. The letter, she would have gone over it many times before she sealed it. She would have read it the way she read contracts, looking for anything she might have missed. He paused. She wouldn't have missed anything. No, Callum said. She never did. They sat for a moment in the quiet of the conference room on the 41st floor, with the letter between them and the unsigned contract beside it, and the view of the city visible through the tall windows, the streets below moving in their ordinary way, indifferent to what was happening in the room above them. Daniel, Callum said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Yes, sir. Was there anything else? Anything else she asked you to do, or told you, or left for you? Any other promise? Daniel thought. He thought carefully, the way his mother had taught him to think, completely, without rushing, looking for anything he might have missed. She told me to stay in school, he said. She told me to read everything, including the small print. She told me not to let anyone make a decision for me that I could make for myself. He paused. She told me she was proud of me, even though she hadn't seen yet what I was going to become. He paused again. She said she didn't need to see it. She already knew. Callum looked at the boy beside him. He thought about Grace Osei at her desk in the compliance office on the 28th floor, reading a 40th revision of a contract. He thought about her finding the thing hidden in the 3rd schedule. He thought about her writing 4 pages by hand, in the small, precise handwriting he had read on 1,000 documents, and sealing them in an envelope addressed to him, and giving the envelope to her 10-year-old son, and making him promise. He thought about the weight of that promise, what it required of an 11-year-old boy. 2 buses, a subway, 6 blocks, a reception desk, a conference room full of lawyers. He thought about the pen he had set down. I'm going to need some time with the contract, Callum said. with my own legal team, not Forsyth's team, my own people, who I choose. He looked at Daniel. It's going to take a few weeks. The counterparties will not be pleased. She said good decisions take the time they take, Daniel said. She was right. She usually was. Callum stood. He picked up the letter and folded it carefully along its original creases. He held it for a moment, the 4 pages in his hand, and then he did something that Daniel had not expected. He held it out to him. This is yours, Callum said. She wrote it for me to read, and I've read it. But it came from her, and she gave it to you. It belongs with you. Daniel took the letter. He looked at it for a moment, the 4 pages in his hands, his mother's handwriting on the outside page, the single underlined phrase visible through the paper where the pages had shifted. He folded it back along the creases and placed it carefully in the inside pocket of his jacket, in the same pocket where it had been for 3 days. Thank you for coming, Callum said. I mean that. I know what it cost you. It didn't cost me anything, Daniel said. I promised. The legal review took 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, Callum did several things. He called Forsyth and told him to communicate the postponement to the counterparties in the language he had specified, a due diligence item requiring review, and to hold all further communications until he heard back. Forsyth had asked twice whether this was certain, and Callum had said yes twice, and the second time Forsyth had stopped asking. He went to his office on the 28th floor. He had not been to the compliance division in some time, not since the reorganization following Grace's death, when the division had been restructured and the new head brought in. He went now. He introduced himself to the current staff, several of whom he had never met. He asked to see the internal memo file for the Meridian Tower transaction, the complete file going back to the beginning. The memo Grace had written, the one that had been reviewed and deemed satisfactory, was in the file. He read it. It said exactly what her letter had said it said. It had been stamped, reviewed, and cleared in the red ink the compliance division used for closed items. The stamp was dated 3 weeks after Grace's death, and the initials beside it belonged to the incoming compliance head who had been in the role for 3 weeks at that point. Callum looked at the stamp for a long time. Then he put the file back and went back upstairs. He assembled a team of 4 attorneys he had worked with for years and trusted specifically because they had no connection to the Meridian Tower transaction and therefore no investment in its outcome. He gave them the contract, the third schedule, subsection 4, C, and Grace's letter. He told them he needed a complete assessment of the environmental liability provision and an independent valuation of the remediation exposure. He did not tell them how he had found the issue. He told them that a compliance concern had been raised through an internal channel and required independent review. This was true, if not complete. The counterparties, represented by their own law firms, were not pleased with the postponement. Forsyth communicated their displeasure in a series of emails that Callum read and did not respond to until he had the review results in front of him. He had been doing this long enough to know that displeasure was not the same as withdrawal, and that people who had spent 14 months on a deal did not walk away from it because the signing was delayed by 3 weeks. He was right. The review confirmed everything Grace had written. The contamination was real. The 1991 report was exactly where she had said it was. The provision in subsection 4, C, was not standard warranty language. It was a deliberate transfer of liability structured to be missed. The remediation estimate from Callum's team came in at $62 million at minimum, with a legal exposure ceiling that they declined to put a specific number on and instead described as significant and open-ended. When Callum showed the review results to the counterparty's legal team, the room was very quiet for a very long time. The deal was renegotiated. The remediation liability was retained by the seller, as it should have been from the beginning, and a remediation fund was established as a condition of closing. The transaction ultimately went forward 3 months later on terms that Grace Osei would have approved. Callum signed his name on the revised contract on a Tuesday morning in November, with his own team in the room and no one else. After he signed, he sat for a moment at the conference table with the pen in his hand. He thought about a 4-page letter. He thought about an 11-year-old boy in a school uniform with polished shoes. He thought about the phrase potentially company-ending underlined once in small, precise handwriting. He thought about a woman who had spent some of the last time she had making sure the right information reached the right person. He opened the drawer on the right side of the conference table, not his desk drawer, but he had the same habit in every room he worked in, and he put the pen inside. Then he made a call. The call was to his assistant, who he asked to locate the contact information for a woman named Patricia Osei in the east of the city. This took 20 minutes. When it came back, he called the number himself. Patricia Osei answered on the 3rd ring. She had a voice that sounded like her sister's, precise, careful, the voice of a person who listened before they spoke. Callum introduced himself. He told her that her nephew had come to his office 3 weeks earlier and had done something that mattered a great deal. He told her he would like to speak with her, at her convenience, about Daniel's education and future. He told her that Grace Osei had been one of the best people he had ever worked with, and that he considered himself to have a debt, and that he would very much like to discuss how it might begin to be repaid. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He didn't tell me he'd done it." "No?" "He's been quiet for 3 weeks. I thought something was wrong at school." A pause. "He doesn't talk about things until they're finished. He's always been like that. His mother was the same way." Callum looked at the view from his window, the streets below, the buildings, the particular order of things seen from above. "He kept a letter for over a year," Callum said. "He carried it across the city on 2 buses and a subway. He told 7 lawyers in a conference room not to sign a contract." He paused. "He did all of it because he made a promise." Patricia was quiet again. When she spoke, her voice had something in it that was not quite composed, the way voices went when something arrived that had been waited for. "She knew he would," Patricia said. "She told me, before the end. She said, he'll do it. He doesn't break promises." A pause. "She was right." "She usually was," Callum said. Daniel was in his room at his aunt's apartment when Patricia came to the door and knocked twice. He had his homework open on the desk, mathematics, a page of problems he had been working through in the careful, sequential way he worked through everything. The room was small, but it was his. A bed, a desk, a shelf with books arranged by subject and then by size within subject, the blue box on the floor beside the shelf where the bed used to be, before he had moved things around to get more desk space. His aunt had let him arrange the room however he wanted. She had understood, without being told, that a person who had lost what he had lost needed to feel that some small things were in his control. He looked up when she knocked. She came in. She sat on the edge of his bed. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she had that was closest to his mother's expression, precise and warm and slightly amused by the world in a way that suggested the world had tried harder things than amusing her and had not always succeeded. "Callum Hurst called me," she said. Daniel looked at his homework. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "It wasn't finished yet," he said. "I didn't want to talk about it until it was finished." "Is it finished?" He thought about it. He thought about the conference room and the letter and the pen set down on the table. He thought about 3 weeks of not knowing and a phone call he hadn't been in. He thought about his mother in the chair by the window, telling him what she needed him to do, and the way she had looked at him when he said, "I promise," and how she had nodded once, the same nod he had inherited, the nod that meant confirmed, and looked back out the window. "I think so," he said. "Yes." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. She had her sister's face in some lights, the same jaw, the same quality of attention, the same particular way of going still when she was thinking, rather than filling the silence with sound. She did not have her sister's handwriting or her sister's way with contracts. But she had, Daniel had learned in the year they had lived together, her sister's way of sitting with a thing until she understood it completely before she responded to it. "Mr. Hurst said the deal is going forward," she said. "On different terms. He said your mother's letter changed the terms." Daniel nodded. "He said he would like to talk about your schooling, about what comes next." She paused. "He said he considered himself to have a debt." Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about the word debt and what it meant when a powerful man used it in this context. He thought about his mother's 4 pages. He thought about the single underlined phrase. "She didn't do it for that," he said. "I know," Patricia said. "He knows too. I think that's why he said it the way he said it." She looked at him carefully. "It's all right to let people help you, Daniel. It's not the same as owing them." Daniel looked at the mathematics on his desk. The next problem, a geometry question, angles and lengths, the kind that had one correct answer if you worked through it properly. She would say, "Accept what's offered with grace," he said. That was one of her things. Accept what's offered with grace, and give back more than you received. She would say that, Patricia agreed. She did say that, to me, many times. "Okay," Daniel said. "Tell him I said thank you." Patricia nodded. She stood. At the door, she stopped and looked back at him. The small room, the arranged books, the blue box on the floor beside the shelf, the boy at the desk with his homework and his pencil, and the particular quality of stillness he carried that she had learned was not sadness, though it had come partly from sadness, but was something else. The stillness of a person who had been asked to carry something heavy and had done it, and now knew, in the specific way you only knew after the fact, that they had been capable of it all along. "She would be proud of you," Patricia said. Daniel looked at his homework. He pressed his lips together for a moment. "I know," he said. He said it not with arrogance, but with the specific quiet certainty of someone who had been told a thing by the person who knew them best and had chosen to believe it. "She told me before she died. She said it then so I would have it after." Patricia nodded. She looked at him for one more moment. "Finish the mathematics," she said. "Then come for dinner." She closed the door. Daniel turned back to his homework. He picked up his pencil. He looked at the geometry problem, the angles, the lengths, the thing that had one correct answer if you worked through it in the right order and did not skip steps. He began. On the shelf beside the desk, the blue box sat with its lid closed and its contents changed. The envelope gone now, delivered, the promise kept, the thing his mother had asked of him, completed in the way she had meant it to be completed. Completely, correctly, without skipping steps. He did not look at it. He did not need to. He already knew what was in it.